There used to be a clock in here. 4:33, we'll call the Finance Committee meeting to order. Just a couple of quick notes and we'll dive into things, I guess. First, officially, thank you to Mayor Reardon and Councillor Norton for joining us from their vacation, and Councillor Radwin for being here, and all the staff. This is a tough time of year to have a big meeting, and this is a fairly big meeting. So I appreciate everybody giving up your Thursday night to be here, and hopefully we'll make positive use of the time. So call to order, looking for an approval of the agenda. The CFO and I have had a bit of a conversation, and it's a long agenda, and Councillor Hickey is unable to be with us tonight, so we thought maybe we will take item 3.2 and table it to the next meeting, the actual deep dive into the orientation, so we have more time to have that conversation. So if that meets with the approval of the committee, I'd entertain a motion to approve the agenda while tabling 3.2. Thanks, Councillor Radlin. And Mayor Reardon, thank you. Questions on the motion? All in favor, aye. Contrary minded, carried. Item 2.1 is terms of reference for the Finance Committee. Mr. CFO, did you want to speak to that?
Thank you, Chairman Sullivan, members of the committee. This is an item on the consent agenda. This is simply amendments to the terms of reference to the Finance Committee to reflect current state. You'll see in the report, it simply reflects the fact that the Finance Committee is no longer a pilot committee. That's been removed. That reference has been removed. The composition of the committee has been modified to 5 members. And simply, it's just housekeeping items that's been updated and reflected on this terms of reference, but it must be adopted and brought to council for formal approval. Thank you.
So
I'll move the recommendation, please.
Mayor Reardon, Councillor Radwin, thank you. Questions on the motion? All in favor, aye.
Aye.
Contrary minded? Carried. 3.1 is approval of minutes from April 28th.
Move approval of minutes.
Mayor Reardon, Councillor Radwin, questions? All in favor, aye.
Aye.
Contrary minded? Carried. 3.3, 2020 Consolidated Audited Financial Statements. Mr. Fudge.
Thank you, Chairman Sullivan, committee members. I am pleased to introduce this evening Mr. Stephen Lund. He's the managing partner from the auditing firm Deloitte to present his audit results on the audit of the 2020 Consolidated Financial Statements for the City of St. John. Also in attendance this evening with Deloitte is Jeremy Millet, who is the senior manager who oversaw the audit and managed the audit on site. Before handing it over to Mr. Lund, who will present his findings, and then after Mr. Lund presents, we'll hand the presentation over to Ms. Dawn Arbor to provide a presentation of the statements themselves. Just like to offer a few introductory comments. First and foremost, as you'll hear soon from Mr. Lund, Deloitte is issuing the city an unqualified audit opinion on the consolidated statements, which essentially means we've received a clean audit with no material misstatements identified. Also in your kit, you will see the financial statements for the final year of Develop SJ that have been audited, the city's trust funds that have been audited, and a statement of revenue and expenses of the Trade Convention Center, all of which have received clean audit opinions from Deloitte. I would like to extend my gratitude to staff, in particular Dawn Arbor, who led the audit, in a year of incredible challenges with respect to trying to audit through a global pandemic, and the support of our incredible IT team, who during a cyber attack helped us ensure we were able to provide all the necessary documentations to our auditors to receive this end result. You can see by the kit, this is an incredible amount of work that takes months to complete. I'd also like to extend my appreciation to Deloitte, who also had to audit the city under these circumstances, were top-notch, and who worked seamlessly with staff in an effective and efficient manner. The consolidated audited financial statements includes the financial results of 15 controlled entities. They are very complex. They're presented in accordance with generally accepted accounting principles, which are different than the accounting standards from which we budget on an annual basis. But for budget purposes, and you'll see later in the presentation, The general operating fund of the City of St. John ended the year with an approximately $991,000 deficit, mostly associated with the impacts from COVID-19. But we are very well positioned to absorb that deficit when it rolls into 2022 as its first expense in the 2022 budget, due to the fact that we've got safe restart funding in reserves provided for that very purpose for COVID-19 impacts. You'll also see in the fund-based statements, St. John Water, who ended the year for budget purposes with a surplus of approximately $969,000. And you will see later on in Ms. Arbor's presentation, the statements will illustrate great success in receiving capital funding from other levels of government. We've had another significant milestone in reducing the net debt for the organization, while continuing to illustrate responsible financial management of our day-to-day operations. So with that, I will turn things over to Mr. Lund to present his audit report. Thank you.
Fudge. So can everyone hear me okay on the mic? And I assume I can remove the mask. Excellent. Okay. Well, good evening, everyone. My name is Steve Lund, managing partner for Deloitte in New Brunswick and PEI, and I've signed the City of St. John audit report for, I guess, the last 2 or 3 years for sure. I've got my senior manager, Jeremy Mallet, who's been on the file for years and years as well. And we're going to pass the presentation back and forth a little bit, if that's okay. I'll provide the 10,000-foot view of how the audit went. Jeremy will then walk you through some of the details of the report. And then I'll come back and just kind of close up at the end, if that's good with everyone. So as Kevin mentioned, we are in position to issue an unmodified report at this time, which is great. So the normal process of closing out, which is, includes approval of the financial statements at council, signing of management representation letters, and all of the normal course items are left to be done before we sign the report. But really, this is the right stage in the game where you want to be at this time. As Kevin mentioned, no uncorrected errors and disclosure deficiencies, which is fantastic, especially given the circumstances that the city found itself in this year. So last year, you would have started going into the COVID-19 pandemic, which from an accounting perspective means that a lot of the internal controls and things that you had to do in person, you no longer were able to do that. So all of a sudden you're kind of thrown into a virtual environment where you're using systems and so on to implement all of your controls. And so just as you got used to that a little bit, a little thing called a cyber attack came along and took away all of the virtual tools that you were using in order to perform all your accounting functions. So, we had a lot of empathy for the finance team. They worked very, very hard. The circumstances that they had to go through to get to this point, very impressive. And they did that with a smile and worked very closely with our team. So really good job there. And, as we went through, obviously the focus was number one, how do you get auditing through a pandemic? We've been doing this for many, many months now. So we've kind of figured it out. And essentially, instead of doing some of the in-person things, you're still, our job is ultimately to see if someone's lying about numbers. And so, the way that you, instead of doing in-person meetings, you might do more Teams meetings. You've got to look for consistent stories throughout the file, making sure that things tie together and applying the appropriate amount of professional skepticism. So all that we did kind of at the end of last year as well. So all that continues to remain. But a big focus, of course, was in the response and the audit response on the cyber attack, right? And so I would kind of cut that into 3 buckets, and Jeremy will talk to it a little bit as well. But the first important thing to do was to understand the risk of the integrity of the transactions pre-attack, right? So, did any of these transactions get tampered with in a material way? And so we would have involved a number of our IT and cyber folks in working with the city service providers and Bulletproof and Mandiant to assess what that risk was. And ultimately, we came to the conclusion that we're okay from a risk perspective. You can never be 100% on these things, but based on the reports that we received and we worked directly with the service provider, we ended up being comfortable there. And then number 2, when the systems were unavailable, you had to come up with ways to process your transactions without the systems. And so a number of temporary internal controls had to be put in place at a very short order and processes. And so we had to get an additional understanding of all of these temporary internal controls and processes to make sure that there were no meaningful gaps that we couldn't get around. So we worked very closely with Don and Kevin and team as soon as it happened to make sure that we could understand that. And then our audit approach on those transactions would have been very much what we call substantive. So rather than relying on the controls, because these controls are not going to last into perpetuity anyway, we would just do more samples and things like that rather than rely on controls. And then the third step is once the systems are back online, getting those transactions, which you posted in a different format or different mechanism, and getting them actually into the system again. And so, making sure that there's not duplicate transactions that were booked, things like that. That's kind of the third step. And so all of that is layered on top of the COVID-19 auditing and then, just a regular audit year. So all of the other parts of the audit, I would say, were pretty consistent with past years. Our significant risks, materiality, our processes, the way we approach the audit would have been pretty consistent. But that cyber attack really was the story of the year, which I'm sure you guys can appreciate was the story in all things in the year. So I won't beat that dead horse. But with that, I would thank the team of City of St. John for working with us. I know that it was a tough year, a frustrating year, but they were always open, honest, and transparent in dealing with us, and so we really appreciate that. So with that, Jeremy can walk you through the report. It's about 5 or 10 minutes that we'll go through. And if you can interrupt or ask questions, or I'll come back and I can answer questions as well. Okay.
All right. Am I doing this right? We haven't touched the computer yet. Okay. Wonderful. So thank you, Steve. Am I running the presentation? Okay. Oh, on the desktop. Here. Excellent. So I don't know if I can close out of this.
If it's PDF, can he share it on the screen there?
So is it a Teams meeting? Is that?
It's right here.
Or maybe I need to, can I drag it to another?
We'll let Richard do it.
Drag it to a second screen maybe.
I think he's got it.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you very much. Okay. Wonderful. So, like Steve said, I'll just be 5 or 10 minutes going through this and presenting it. If at any point you'd like more information or more detail, please don't hesitate. So I'll start right here at the executive summary. So as Mr. Fudge said, we will be presenting or issuing our financial statements in accordance with public sector accounting standards under the Canadian generally accepted auditing standards. So that is consistent year over year, no changes. There are no changes to our fees based on our proposal that was issued in 2018. So again, very consistent from that perspective. Our significant risks we will talk about, I will go through in a little bit more detail further on. But they are consistent year over year. Presumed risk of fraud on revenue recognition for property taxes, unconditional grants, and other revenue. And then management override controls, which are both our presumed fraud risks within all of our audits that we do. No uncorrected misstatements, but our materiality, just for the information of this committee, is at $7,460,000. That is based on revenue, so it's a calculation that we do within our Deloitte audit approach. Of that, just for the purposes of the members of this committee, you would be informed of any misstatements, whether it be monetary, whether it be reclass, or whether it be disclosure deficiencies, of 5% of that number. So Anything of $373,000 or more would be informed to this committee. So I don't want you to think that if there's a $5 million error that it wouldn't be reported. It's, you know, it's anything above that $373,000. So just for information. Outstanding matters are exactly where kind of what we would expect at this point. So there's a few legal letter updates that we have to do within five business days of reporting, signed management rep letter, completion of subsequent event procedures. So nothing out of the ordinary, nothing that would be of surprise to anybody. Highlights, I'll go through a little bit more detail, but obviously COVID-19 and cyber attack, which Steve already pretty well went through in a fair bit of detail, but we'll pass through that. Audit fees, as I said, are consistent with our proposal. Going concern, so there's really no, we agree with management's assessment, and there's no doubt on the city's ability to continue as a going concern. And as Mr. Fudge said again, we are planning on issuing a clean audit opinion as a result of our audit procedures. Significant audit risks and events. So the presumed risk of fraud is present in all of our audits under revenue. Some revenue streams we don't believe have necessarily that fraud risk to it. So it could be areas where there are set percentages or set fees that are done. So we go through that in quite a bit of detail, and we analyze the risk, and then we respond to that risk by evaluating the design and implementation of controls when there are some present. We confirm balances with third parties where possible, and then we also perform detailed procedures to kind of supplement those things. And you know, it concluded this year that there are no material misstatements. Management override control, again, is present in all of our audits. It's very unique to the fact that management is in a position to perpetrate fraud if they so chose. They have the ability, they have the means, they have the competencies to do so. So we ensure that through our procedures that there are, you know, this risk is mitigated. So we'll perform fraud inquiries. So it's kind of questions at all levels of the business to ensure that, you know, they haven't been asked to do things that they aren't comfortable with or that are outside of the ordinary course of business. We do look at all journal entries as part of our testing, and we select a sample of those around risk areas. So whether it be you know, entries that are posted on weekends or large amounts that are kind of out of the ordinary, we would pick up on. And then any unusual or significant transactions that might have occurred. So again, we obtained sufficient audit evidence to conclude that there were no material misstatements in the current year, and we are comfortable with that. Significant events, as Steve said, you know, we've been dealing with this as everybody has, but we transitioned last year and performed most of the audit of the city of St. John within the pandemic. So this was actually year 2 for us. With the city, and really, you know, year over year, the improvements, the efficiency were there if it wasn't for, you know, the other beasts that we'll discuss. So very comfortable with the fact that we weren't able to. We actually did have some interactions face to face where we felt like there was efficiencies in doing so, whether it be avoiding everybody scanning, you know, invoices when we could just send somebody over and look at that, have a few conversations, lots of team meetings. So overall, very comfortable with the challenges and our response, and as well as management's response. So really appreciate their willingness to help us out in those cases and work with us and within our timeline. So the impact was mitigated, and again, it was the second year that we were through it, so it was pretty well you know, business as usual for us. The cyber attack, you know, this gives a bit of background, which I'm sure everybody here is very much aware of. We did perform additional procedures and identified additional risks related to them. So as Steve said, there were the transactions at the date of, during, and then kind of how they were incorporated into the process after. And I believe that management did a great job of reaching out to us as it was happening real time to see what we thought would be the best course of business, and it really helped us to gain comfort over the process and follow through them throughout the process. So where all the transactions were actually still recorded within the GL, it made the process much easier versus bringing on other accounting functions or accounting systems. So we were comfortable. We were able to scope our audit accordingly, to work within the timelines and move, you know, weeks. We originally planned for February, and it moved, and it was the transparency that really allowed us to get comfort. So overall, we were able to conclude that there was there are no material misstatements related to the cyber attack, and again, working with our experts, the city's experts allowed us to get there. Significant accounting policies, judgments, and estimates. So this is consistent year over year. It's also consistent with many businesses. So the allowance for doubtful accounts, tangible capital assets, which is useful lives, amortization impairments require some judgment, accounts payable accruals, and then the assumptions related to pension plans, which we work with the actuaries on as well. So no issues in that regard, and is consistent year over year, but we do spend a fair bit of time around those judgment areas. Appendix 1, so that's these 3 pages are really just communication requirements that we are required as your auditors to ensure that we're providing to you, whether it be through our audit service presentation, which would happen in the fall, whether it be throughout the audit, if there were any kind of major issues that we encountered, or at this meeting here to report any items. So again, we have fulfilled these. We kind of add our flavor here, and one of the items that we do talk about here is just whether there's any instances of fraud that the committee is aware of during the year that might affect the statements that haven't already kind of been discussed or talked about. So I will pause here for just a moment and make sure that there's nothing to note.
Councillors or committee members, would you have anything to suggest?
Excellent.
Hearing nothing, we'll ask you to continue.
Thank you. Appendix 2 simply states that we do perform a group audit. This appendix has changed over the years as we continue to do a few more of the entities around it and kind of streamline that process. But we do kind of get some referral instructions that we send out to KPMG at the Power Commission to ensure that their procedures are sufficient for our audit opinion, which is the St. John Energy does get brought up into the consolidated statement. So again, just part of the audit. It's not different really than last year, and it is the process is quite smooth at this point. Draft version of our audit report. Again, as I've mentioned, there is no qualification on this report. It is consistent year over year. The audit report changed a few years back, but this is the consistent format. And once council approves these, the management rep letter is signed by management. We will date it at that time. And finally, Appendix 4 is just some resources for your reading at night when you can't sleep and you're looking for something to do. So, nothing there to report, but it's just some information on who we are and what we do and how it may affect you in either this role or other roles that you may have. So I will pause there for any questions for myself, and otherwise I'll hand it back over to Mr. Lund.
Any questions from the committee members? If you're on the line, we can't see you, so just buzz in. Down there, Councillor Radwin, you good? Are they related to the audit or to the numbers? So we're going to talk about the numbers in a little bit, so I think we're good.
Excellent. Thank you.
Perfect. I'll be just about 30 more seconds. So thanks, Jeremy. He's really the heart and soul of the team. So I wanted him to walk you through the details of the audit. I'll once again thank the team and Kevin and Don and everyone in helping us get to the point where we are today. Again, I'll just reiterate that as far as all of our interactions that we had with management, as an auditor, you get a bit of a spidey sense sometimes, and there was always openness, honesty, and transparency. In particular, as we're going through the cyber attack, I think I got a message from Kevin that night, and then we were speaking with Don the next day. So, always wanted to do the right thing versus the convenient thing, and that's pretty much it for us. So happy to take any additional questions, but I think you probably already had the opportunity with Jeremy. So that's it for me.
Thanks very much, Steve and Jeremy. Last opportunity for committee members to ask questions of our auditors. Don't see anybody moving, so that's good. So, looking for a motion to recommend approval of the statements.
So moved.
Radwin and Mayor Reardon. On the question, all in favor, aye.
Aye.
Contrary minded? Carried. So those go to council? Common council Monday? On Monday.
It won't be this coming meeting. There's some housekeeping to do, and we'll be at the next meeting.
So at the following meeting after some housekeeping. Okay, thank you.
Okay, Richard, do we have to do something? Oh, you got it?
Anything else on 3.3, Mr. CFO?
We're going to go through
The consolidated statements?
consolidated statements, yes. Ms. Arbor can walk us through.
Excellent. Through you, Mr. Chairman and members of the Finance Committee, good evening. First, I'd like to thank Mr. Lund and Mr. Millay from Deloitte for bringing this across the finish line this year. These statements in a normal year can be very challenging and to complete due to their complexity, but the cyber attack added a whole new set of hurdles and barriers for our team and those ABCs that were also affected by it. We are very pleased to have successfully achieved a clean audit opinion in the wake of the cyber attack. So tonight, I'm going to present to you the results of the general and utility funds and attempt to explain how these fit within the consolidated financial statements. If you refer to the general fund financial statements that are on page 88 of the kit, revenues ended up down by $3.6 million compared to budget. The major variance here is attributed to the financial assistance. We had budgeted about $9.3 million, but we only ended up needing $4.6 million. This was offset slightly by property taxes that were $2.1 million over budget due to LNG. As for our own source revenues, losses due to the pandemic in various categories, such as parking revenue and the accommodation levy, were offset by funds received from the provincial government for Safe Restart and the insurance proceeds that we received or expect to receive in relation to the cyber attack. On the expenditure side, our wages and benefits were $900,000 over budget. This overage is mainly attributed to payroll actuary adjustments. Goods and services, on the other hand, were down by $2.4 million. This positive variance is largely due to the various spending cuts that took place during the early pandemic days. As for the grants and the funds paid to the various ABCs, we came in more than $1.1 million under budget, mainly due to, again, the accommodation levy, which is a revenue and an expense that just flows through. All of this resulted in a net deficit of $991,456. Looking at this deficit by service areas, the bars on the right of the slide represent the service areas that realized savings in 2020. The top navy bar on the left are the extra transfers to reserves that we made. I actually noted this as green because while it is part of the deficit, this is the money that we are saving for a rainy day as we are able to transfer the Safe Restart funds to the reserves. The decrease in financial assistance that I spoke about a few slides ago is included within the red bar. I have also marked this as a positive variance as we were able to use much less short-term provincial money, which demonstrates sound financial management on our part. Turning now to the utility fund, the detailed financial statements are found on page 139 in your kit. We have a surplus of $969,000. All positive variances here. These funds that were received under the Safe Restart program offset the loss in revenue due to the pandemic. Fiscal charges were kept in check and operating expenses were kept well under budget, resulting in a $2.1 million total savings here. And just like in the general fund, the Safe Restart money was transferred to reserves for future use. So as I move into the consolidation to further discuss what Deloitte was presenting earlier, I would like to bring to your attention our requirements for financial reporting under the applicable legislation. So the New Brunswick Local Governance Act essentially requires us to keep two different sets of books. Under Section 99.2 and 117.4, we are required to operate under balanced budgets for each the general and utility operating funds. We are also required under Canadian public sector accounting standards to prepare one set of financial statements in accordance with general accepted accounting principles of all the agency, boards, and commissions that fall under the City of St. John umbrella. As you will note from this slide, there are 15 separate entities that are either board-controlled or board-appointed by mayor and council that are combined together to produce the consolidated financial statements. As previously noted, Deloitte has issued a clean audit opinion, which means that the financial statements present in all material aspects the financial position of the city in accordance with Canadian public sector accounting standards. These statements are extremely difficult to comprehend because they are only prepared and brought to you once per year. The rest of the year, we talk about balanced budgets and we bring financial results to Finance Committee and Council that are nothing like these consolidated financial statements. The general fund statements present a set of numbers that are essentially used to establish the property rate tax every year. These are also meant to ensure that our revenues equal our expenditures for the year. Those results are just a very small piece of this consolidated package. The major differences between the accounting within the general fund financials and the consolidated financials are listed here. The most important thing to note, though, is that these are two very different sets of financial statements and are enormously different and provide different information. If you can take something away, that is probably the best takeaway. Moving on to the results of the consolidated financial statements, we presented a surplus of just over $36 million in 2020. Of the $36 million, almost $34 million of this is entirely related to money we have received from other levels of government that relates specifically to capital assets. In our general fund financial statements, the $34 million is not included in the budget. So it is not part of balancing the budget. It is held in a different spot where we account for our assets. The $2.7 million operating surplus represents the combined financial numbers from all 15 entities, less adjustments from the consolidation. There's two detailed schedules that I would refer to you in your kit. Page 79 and 80 give kind of a little bit of a detailed reconciliation of how we go from our loss in the general fund of $991,000 to the $36 million surplus in the consolidation. On page 54 of the kit, you will find the statement of financial position. This presents the net debt, which is a key performance indicator of the municipality's overall financial health. The higher the level of net debt, the more future revenues will be needed to fund past transactions and events. In 2020, our net debt has decreased by another $49 million, which is yet another indicator of our ever-improving financial health. This is the historical trajectory of our net debt. As you will see, we are trending in the right direction, and our overall net debt is the lowest it's been since 2014. So in conclusion, we recommend that Finance Committee approves the audited 2020 consolidated financial statements. Finance Committee approves the 2020 Statement of Revenue and Expenses of the St. John Trading Convention Center. That Finance Committee approves the 2020 City of St. John Trust Fund financial statements, the 2020 Develop St. John financial statements, and that Finance Committee recommends that Common Council approve the 2020 consolidated financial statements as presented by staff, as well as the TCC develop St. John and trust fund financial statements. And with that, if anyone has any questions, I would be happy to respond.
Thanks very much. Questions from the committee? Councillor Radwin?
Just waiting for my mic. Thank you. I had a few questions about the statements themselves, Don. Ms. Arbor, sorry. Page 6, revenue owned sources of 7 million. Can you tell me what that was?
Page 6. So that's from the statement of operations. So revenue from own sources would be anything that has to do with, let's say, the revenue of the Canada Games Aquatic Center, the revenue at TD Station, parking, the fees, the building permits, pretty much everything that is not related to property taxes or that comes through the provincial government.
Okay. And then I had for page 8, just wondering if there was actually a reason for increase in accounts receivables.
I'm going to defer that one to, maybe Kevin. I do believe I know the answer, but I'm not 100% sure, so I don't want to give a wrong answer. So I can either take that away or Craig, okay?
Craig, just have a seat at the last chair there, that way we don't have to worry about. Through you, Mr. Chairman, to the member of the committee. So one of the biggest drivers of our receivables going up is obviously the cyber attack. We were extremely late in doing a lot of our billings. A lot of our billings didn't even get done for 2020 until 2021. So that forced us to do a big accrual, and obviously our receivables are up quite a bit due to that fact.
That was my guess. I just wanted clarification. Thank you. And I'm wondering for page 33, where the decrease in revenue from others?
That was exactly due to land sales were down. The TD Station revenue was down because it was closed down for most of the year. Canada Games Aquatic Center also, trade and convention, parking. It's all those own source revenues that were affected by the pandemic.
Chair, I have more questions. Do you want me to come back or, okay. Trade and Convention Center, whoa. Just wondering if we're able to know what the percentage of revenue that the city gets from room rental and food and beverage sales.
That would be, the breakdown is included in the Trade and Conventions financial statements that are included in the kit. I don't have them with me, but they were part of that.
Okay. I didn't see the percentage. It just says that there is a percentage. So, but the numbers are there to see like what you could get. Like I saw the breakdown of that. I have all kinds of questions about their agreement, but that's probably something separate. For salaries, I'm just thinking staff-wise running Trade and Convention Center. Is this Local 18 that's working in the Trade and Convention Center?
I think questions, if I might suggest, specific to the Trade and Convention Center, we do have ongoing discussions with that, but the finance folks might not have that level of operational detail.
Sure.
So I might suggest, because I know you've got a good list of questions, we can connect you through with staff to get a lot of them answered. I think some of them might come up as we look at ABCs in particular, because
Sure.
that's part of our ongoing review. So if you can hit your questions related to the statements we've got, and then we will follow up with you to make sure you get the information on the other ones.
Yeah, because I did have a question about like there's management fee, the real estate tax. I mean, these are sometimes normally fees that are put on to the other organizations. So that's where my questions are kind of tying in. How is this actually city money expenditures? So
That's a good question.
right. So that's why I'm trying to
But
get.
how about we elevate it to that question about how these relate to being city fees? Is that
Yeah.
kind of the higher level. version without
Exactly.
resume?
That's why I'm trying to wrap my head around that.
Okay, so you're talking about like the Trade and Convention Center, what part of that rolls into the consolidation? So we would take in, I think it's 67% of all the revenues and all the expenses from the Trade and Convention Center, and that's due to regional facilities. Then what would happen is we would bring that in, and anything that goes between the city and the TCC would get eliminated. So anything that's left in the numbers within the consolidated statements only relate to outside business. So for example, the management fee, that is something that the city pays to the TCC every year. That gets eliminated. So that number is in the trade center statements, but doesn't get included in the consolidation. And then 67% of everything else would get pulled in. Does that make sense?
It makes sense, Don. Unfortunately, I think the deal has been not something that I would have liked to have signed off on, but I totally appreciate your numbers. You guys have done a great job as usual.
Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Redmond. Mayor Reardon, Councillor Norton, any questions? A shake of the head from the mayor. And
None
Councillor Norton's
here, Mr.
Stoic, but lovely picture.
No.
You good?
I'm good, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Awesome. So if we could have the recommendations back up on the screen, I'd entertain a motion for the recommendations.
Move the recommendation.
Thanks, Councillor Norton. Second. Councillor Radwin. On the motion, all in favor, aye. Contrary minded?
Aye.
Carried. Thanks, Ms. Arbor.
Thank you.
3.4. Again, thank you, Mr. Lund, Mr. Millay. Appreciate your work and continued work with the city.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
From one audit to another.
One audit to another. Thank you.
3.4, Mr. Fudge.
Yes, thank you, Chairman Sullivan, members of the committee. We just heard the external audit this evening. Tonight, the city introduces a key new function set forth in the city manager's restructuring plan with the introduction of an internal audit function for the city of St. John. The role of internal audit is to provide the city an objective and unbiased view and advice on the organization's risk management, internal control, effectiveness, and compliance with applicable laws and regulation. The advice is unbiased and unfiltered. Internal audit is inward focused, and unlike an external audit, the internal audit looks beyond financial statements and reports risk to broader issues of strategic importance. I am pleased to introduce from the Finance Department, Jody Forgy, who will lead internal auditing for the City of St. John. Ms. Forgy brings private sector experience to this role, holds professional designations as a CPA and a chartered business evaluator. Ms. Forgy will also explain in her presentation the function, the recommended governance structure based on best practice, and how she will create an internal audit plan through the Finance Committee. But before I do turn things over to Ms. Forgy, I would ask the City Manager if you'd like to add anything to this introduction.
Thank you, Commissioner Fudge. Chair, members of the committee. As you go through this, I guess I would ask you to just keep in the back of your mind that what we are not creating here is an auditor general function. This is not an inspection. This is not anything of that sort. In fact, internal audit in high-performing corporations is viewed very much as part of the team. And the internal auditors work as part of that team and with the team to drive continuous improvement in an organization. It's a very powerful function so long as that team approach is embraced by all. And I have every reason to believe, as we went through this restructure and spoke about this, I have every reason to believe that it will be embraced by all and it will help drive all of our continuous improvement initiatives. And the second point I'd ask you to keep in mind as Jody goes through the presentation is this is not a financial audit capability. Internal audit looks at much more than just finances and financial statements. It looks at performance of the entire organization, and it is a risk-based evaluation. I just would like to drive those 2 points home at the beginning of this as Ms. Forgy takes you through the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, City Manager. Do I need to do anything
You do
to
not.
get this up? Oh, right. Awesome. That doesn't look right.
You need to change the clarification on there.
Nope.
Richard, can you go on down and help me find the presentation? Oh, there we go. Never mind.
Apparently, I don't have the touch with the technology. All right. Good evening, Chairman Sullivan and members of the Finance Committee, colleagues. This evening, I'm going to present the internal audit services to you. And as mentioned, my name is Jody Forgy, and I'm the Senior Manager within the Finance Department. I'm going to try to make you feel as excited about internal audit as I get when I talk about it. I really don't have technology. It's not clicking through. I'm cursed.
I don't know what it's doing. Oh, it's because there's more than one open.
Huh?
Oh, there's like 50 open.
Try clicking it, see if it works before you leave. Okay. So luckily I'm not in charge of IT. There we go. All right. So I'll give you a quick run through of what internal audit is, the governance around it. You have the charter that was attached to your kit, and then we'll talk about the recommendations. So internal audit looks at many areas that will assist the city in achieving its goals. Internal audit is focused on risk, strategic growth, and operational efficiency. Internal audit was also one of the objectives in our strategic plan that we are working on. And the definition you see up here is fixed and is known by the Institute of Internal Auditors. So in order to ensure we start off on the right foot, we are going to follow the International Professional Practice Framework, known as the IPPF, and it really sets the tone of our work and provides guidance on the activities we perform. Our goal at the city is to be small but a mighty function where we will aim to perform top quality work, and where feasible, we will adhere to the recommended requirements in this, and we will always follow the mandatory. There are many stakeholders who can be impacted by internal audit activities. The main difference in categories is based on the needs, investments, and interests in the area being reviewed. But a common theme across all areas is the need to have collaboration. So here at the city, we have created 2 lines of service for the internal audit function. You'll see the audit services is based on a risk-based approach, which will go through an audit plan, and then our recommendations will be provided to you through the Finance Committee. Then you'll see consulting and advisory services, and I want to stress that this is extremely important. This is where you'll see the key differentiator between an auditor general role and an internal audit role. So this can also be known as special projects, and this is where we allow management the opportunity to request help without looking at a full-blown audit. And this work will go through a work plan approved by the city manager, and it could end up with a report to them or just discussions. It's really just making sure that they embed us in their work. When you Google audits, you'll see lots of varieties of what audits can be. To create clarity for everyone, we created these 3 buckets that we're considering our work product in. So you'll see performance audits, financial audits, as the city manager already explained, is not our financial audit. This has to be done by an external audit provider providing the audit opinion. This is more around key controls like they were mentioning earlier. around processes that relate to financials, and then the compliance and regulatory audits. And then in this slide, you're just seeing some examples of what each audit could be. Something that's really big that's been going on for the past several years at the city is implementing policies. So if you see under compliance and regulatory audits, we could add a lot of value by reviewing to make sure these policies were actually implemented properly and being adhered to. From our governance model, we report administratively to the CFO and functionally through you, the Finance Committee, to Common Council. And then also attached, you had the internal audit charter. And this slide shows you the Finance Committee role, but the biggest part of the role is approving the charter that you have and then approving the audit plan to go to Common Council. In this charter as well, we included all of the requirements from the IPPF to make sure that we are following the mandatory requirements. I wanted to show you this just because there are so many ways that internal audit can be structured, and many municipalities do have some form of internal audit, and our focus is really going to be on adding value to the organization. So within audit, we follow a risk-based approach. And I really like this because it shows that risks represent the barriers to successfully achieving objectives, as well as the opportunities that may help achieve those objectives. And risks may relate to preventing bad things from happening or failing to ensure good things happen. So taking risks. So this is all about managing the risk and knowing that as an organization, we can't audit everything. So we'll be using a risk-based approach to find out where are the areas we're most exposed and which areas we should focus on the most. In order to do our risk-based approach, we also need to have our risk categories. So here we decided that we would pick 5 categories that seemed the most relevant to the city, which you see listed here is strategic, operational, reputational, compliance, and financial. We'll take those risk categories, and for each audit topic, which is part of our audit universe, we'll then rate the risks on a 1 to 5 scale for each category, and then identify which are our top risks that we want to look at. And then we feed those into our audit plan. And we have to consider our resource capability too, because depending on our budget and resources available is the amount of audits we can perform. So the plan for the remainder of the current year is to focus on 2 audits. And we'll present that to Finance Committee to go to Common Council for approval. And I want to emphasize that at this point, when we talk about the internal audit service and the we, I'm using a universal we. Right now it's myself as the resource. So we're going to be mindful so that we have project discipline and that we execute on these projects appropriately with top quality work. So we're going to be mindful of that when we pick our audits and our work plan for the rest of the year. So the intention of our work is meant to be part of the city's journey, which I believe is moving from a path of sustainability to excellence. We have the opportunity to keep getting better if we keep looking for change and growth, and that can happen one person at a time. So thank you for your time. If you have any questions?
Questions from the committee? Councillor Redwin?
I don't have a question. I just have a comment. And I just think that this is such a great step in the right direction. I'm totally excited about it with you. You actually used the words adding value to the organization. Absolutely. This is a great initiative to be able to align everybody so that we continue to be fiscally responsible, which the departments have done a great job of so far, but to keep us on the right track. It's wonderful for all stakeholders, and I applaud you guys for doing such a great job with this.
Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Redwin. Your Worship, Councillor Norton, any questions, comments?
No questions here, Mr. Chairman.
No questions here, but another fantastic step by Finance. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Your Worship. I guess one highlight for me is when you talked about and mentioned compliance audits. I've been around here a fairly long time, and I've often wondered, policies that we passed back in 2008, 9, do we do them? Did we ever put them? And it's nice to know that we have a system in place now that will be looking to make sure that a lot of the historical things are going, that we're getting things done now, that I'm kind of curious as the research goes on, if you happen to run into things that are a little historical that maybe were done and no longer need to be done. I'm just looking forward to some of that internal work, because I guess I think in a lot of businesses, often people are so busy working in the business that they don't have time to work on the business. And I really see the internal audit function as another piece in the city of St. John of working on our business while we're doing all the other business. So I can hear it has the full support of the committee that's here, which is very nice. We don't have any other questions. Do we have anything we need to move at this point, or do we have a little more information to come?
Want to recommend or to move to the internal audit charter to go to Common Council for approval. And then we also want to include it as part of our procedural bylaw in Schedule C, where there is a listing of policies.
I'll entertain that motion from the committee.
Moved. I'll move that motion.
We'll take Councillor Radwin, seconded by your worship. Thanks very much. And on the question, all in favor? Contrary-minded? Carried unanimously. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
3.5, the ABC reporting policy. Again, Mr. Fudge.
Our 10th policy in the suite of financial policies for the City of St. John. Before I hand the presentation over to Ms. Tiffany Fawcett, accountant in our finance department who led this initiative, just want to provide a few insights on this policy. Agency boards and commissions of the City of St. John are separate entities with separate boards appointed by Common Council. They represent a sizable investment from taxpayers. You'll see in the presentation it's close to over 23% of our operating budget is investment in our ABCs. ABC reporting provides an important communication opportunity to our stakeholders, providing another channel for the agency boards and commissions to demonstrate taxpayer value for money for the taxpayers and outcomes or public benefits received by taxpayers for the investment they are making with the municipal funding. The purpose of this policy is to take the framework that was previously adopted by Common Council and add some formal governance and quality control in terms of a standard operating procedure, a standard template that's been developed, and an approved council policy in line with best practices. So with that, I'll turn things over to Ms. Fawcett to walk the committee through the presentation.
So maybe I shouldn't run the IT department either.
I had it on my list for the end, but maybe I'll take this moment to thank our partners, the Common Clerks Department, for helping us out tonight. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Good evening, Chairman Sullivan and members of Finance Committee. This evening, I'm going to present to you the new agencies, boards, and commissions reporting policy, which I will further refer to in my presentation as the ABC reporting policy. My name is Tiffany Fawcett, as Kevin mentioned, and I'm an accountant within the Finance Department. The end goal of this presentation will be to assist in bridging any reporting gaps between the City of St. John and the ABCs we support through a standardized reporting structure, timelines, and future outlook that ties to the city's long-term financial plan. Before we introduce the structure and review the highlights of the ABC reporting policy, I would like to take a brief pause and draw your attention to the approved policies that we currently have in place, all of which tie to the long-term financial plan of our city. Drawing close and looping in our ABCs is the next step in ensuring alignment to the plan. The following points will be covered throughout the presentation and are described in more detail in the policy and standard operating procedure within the kit. Each bullet point will cover the important components and drivers behind the policy at hand. Requesting our fully and partially funded ABCs to report key performance indicators is not a new idea. In 2015-2016, a reporting framework was designed and rolled out to the ABCs. At that time, it was accepted and the framework was complete, but the interpretation of the data received may not have been properly managed or interpreted, resulting in unclarity of the ABC's story at hand. This has set the foundation for the need and the want of a standard approach that is managed by the committees of the city and then seamlessly released to council for each story to be clearly understood. Using this foundation, the need and importance to extend to a solid policy structure and consistent timelines is based on the $36.3 million of funding granted to the 6 ABCs. This amounts to 23.1% of the general funds budget in 2021. The purpose of this policy is to provide an opportunity of communication, build upon mutual understanding between the city and the ABCs, promote transparency, demonstrate taxpayer value for money, and highlight the performance of public benefit, all through a standardized approach. The ABC reporting policy is not strictly a financial policy. It covers metrics that pertain to growth, finance, and operations by means of key performance indicators that even the most diverse companies can back into. This policy also allows for a 2-stage review, first by the Chief of Staff, looking for satisfactory completeness and compliance. The reports are then passed on to the respective growth, finance, and public safety committees. These committees will review for alignment with the city's long-term financial plan and previously approved policies and sent through to Common Council as a receive and file item on the consent agenda. One highlight on this slide to note is that only ABCs receiving funding from the city are required to adopt this policy, which then brings me into the standard operating procedure. The standard operating procedures are the guidelines supporting the policy and provide a very in-depth definition if an organization is deemed an ABC for this purpose. A funding level approach was used for the standardization. Like mentioned, no funding, no adopting of the policy is required. If funding is between $1 and $250,000, a biannual requirement to submit a standard template and annually provide audited financial statements is required. If funding is over $250,000, there is a biannual requirement to submit a standard template and annually provide audited financial statements, as well as an annual report and do a presentation to the respective committee. Most of the ABCs fall under the over $250,000 tier, with the most diverse difference being the annual report requirement. The standard template was designed with Deloitte as a best-in-practice reporting structure for subsidiaries. It is a 2-page template that will tell a story of each unique ABC driven by key performance indicators. These key performance indicators have a strong focus on growth, finance, and operations, with the current city policies embedded, such as the budget monitoring policy. In collaboration with risk management, legal, the chief of staff, and support from my finance colleagues, A matrix of funding was designed and used to bucket each subsidiary that receives funding from the City of St. John. The determination was each subsidiary falls under one of three categories, either an ABC, a grant, or a service contract. For purpose of this policy, an ABC has three main characteristics. It is a separate legal entity. They carry out a range of functions and services to the community, and they are controlled by the City of St. John. We currently have 6 ABCs which fall under the policy as shown, and adoption of this policy would be a requirement. Those 6 ABCs are TD Station, Transit Commission, St. John Aquatic Center, Police Commission, St. John Trade and Convention Center, and the Lord Beaverbrook Rink. After the foundation was built in prior years, we picked up with Deloitte being engaged to assist with the framework design of the template. In early July 2021, a stakeholder engagement was held to review the design and encourage feedback. Overall, it was a very positive experience with a few future takeaways of possibly aligning this policy and rolling it out into our Regional Facilities Commission and our year-end consolidation process. Recommendations. Overall, staff recommends Finance Committee approve this ABC reporting policy. Staff will then begin orientation and rollout of the policy and new reporting structure and requirement as soon as possible. After the orientation, expected data to begin flowing to the committees by August for biannual reporting period, which would have ended June 30th, 2021.
Thank you very much for the presentation. Just one bit of wording on the recommendations. I think it should be staff recommends that Finance Committee recommend to Common Council, the Common Council approves the ABC reporting policy. So we can get it officially among our suite of policies. Questions or comments from the committee? You don't have to.
I don't have a question, but I do have a comment.
Go ahead, Your
This is, thank you very much. This is great because I love the fact that it's going to have very specific requirements versus, fill out a form that has some information that may or may not be filled out. I do like that it from $1 to 250 has a little bit of a different requirement versus over 250,000. I find it's far more comprehensive than what we've had, and I know the initial concept in 2015 was just a startup to get us going on through that process. So I'm really happy to see this, and I want to thank staff so much because it's hard to get a picture of what's happening, and it's hard to get that feedback to understand if you're getting the value for your dollars you're spending them without this type of reporting. So thanks so much. Really appreciate all the work and really looking forward to what this information is going to bring for us. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Your Worship. Councillor Radwin.
Thank you, Chair, to you, to Ms. Fawcett. You did a great presentation. Thank you. I had one little question. The Lord Beaverbrook, do they end up falling under the 250? Just remind me, 250,000 category, are they above as well?
They're the only one of the 6 that falls under.
I knew the other budgets, unfortunately. I thought that this was, as I kept going through the packet, I just kept getting more and more excited. These the sort of things make me so excited. And I think that, before getting elected, I was starved for this sort of transparency. I wanted to be able to see more than a one-liner on the budget line. So I'm so excited about that. I had a couple of small comments that, first of all, just a comment that it would be absolutely fantastic if regional services would adopt this policy too. And I was also so happy to see the KPIs in there because I think that, showing those sort of measurements is essential to be able to keep track as to, where the progress is. So anyway, great job once again.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Norton, any questions, comments?
Yeah, the only thing I'd say, Mr. Chairman, is, and Tiffany's already echoed this, I think it just, it's it provides some synchronization in terms of how all the ABCs are reporting to us. And right now, that reporting looks different for each of our ABCs. So, bringing standards and best practice. I think that's exactly what Kevin and his team have looked to do. So that when we're looking at the reporting, whether it's Canada Games Aquatic Center or the Police Commission, all the look-fors look the same, so to speak.
Thanks, Councillor Norton. Yeah. I think council had it right in 2015 when they wanted to standardize reporting coming from all of the ABCs. And I see this as another piece of working on the business and taking something that we have done and saying, okay, how can we improve on it? We're not inventing something. We're just elevating systems that we already have. And I think key, 6 entities, TD Station, Transit Commission, Aquatic Center, Police Commission, Trade and Convention Center, and the Lord Beaverbrook Rink, we give them $36 million of our budget every year and appoint the majority of those boards, but then kind of trust and through outside means, the Lod Regional Facilities Commission, that taxpayer money is being looked after. So I think tightening up, standardizing, having a little more oversight into the reporting that comes with this policy, I think is all good and important in our being stewards of the taxpayer dollar. I guess the one question, I think this is all good. Interestingly, we've got a lot of internal departments that are also this large. I think we've got police on the outside and fire on the inside. Is there any thoughts that some of this city manager smiling, bring some of this standardization internally as well?
Chair, through you to the entire committee, that question is the essence of the performance management framework that we are developing now as we speak and is due to be complete at the end of this calendar year. And through that performance management framework, there will be everything to do with the reporting out of it, the key performance indicators, et cetera, that will be fed into council on a regular recurring basis. It is ongoing work, so I can't provide detail on it today, but it is, if not the number one priority in our current work plan, very close to it.
So consistent throughout the organization, this is the external piece looking to connect those ABCs that have 23% of our budget. But we're also working on the internal sections and departments for the other 77% of our budget. That's good to hear, good for citizens to know that we are taking time and making sure we're putting measures in place to make sure that we are even better stewards of the taxpayer dollar. We have some recommendations and looking for a mover and a seconder of the recommendations.
I'll move.
Seconded.
We'll give these to the vacationers.
Thanks.
Mayor Reardon, Councillor Norton, thank you. And all in favor, aye.
Aye.
Contrary minded? Carried unanimously. Thanks, Tiffany. For 3.6, we're going to Mr. McGovern to introduce.
Thank you. Good evening, Chairman Sullivan and members of Finance Committee. Since the inception of the city's asset management policy and the asset management strategy and the infrastructure deficit that was identified within the State of the Infrastructure Report, the city has been primarily using risk and life cycle costs to prioritize investments. However, thanks to the various policies adopted by Finance Committee in recent years and the infrastructure investments made in recent years, very good progress has been made in addressing the city's infrastructure deficit. For that reason, and because our asset management program is maturing, it was time to review and update the asset management policy. I would note that we will be back before Finance Committee in the future to provide the new Finance Committee with some of the details on the background of the asset management program, where we are, where we've come from, and a look ahead as well. But the item before you this evening, for this item, Mr. Samir Yamin, our manager responsible for energy, facilities management, asset management, and climate change portfolio, will provide an overview of the updates we're recommending to Finance Committee as it relates to the asset management policy. And with that, I'll turn it over to Mr. Yamin, who will walk through the highlights of those updates. Thanks.
The good news is I don't have PowerPoint, so we're okay. So as Mr. McGovern indicated, we'll be very happy here to provide you a detail on the asset management program. Otherwise, we'll be here forever talking about it. So my presentation is going to be very brief here. So just to give you some idea about what is the asset management policy, what is the purpose of the asset management policy? The asset management policy is a high-level document. And the reason we need the asset management policy is to ensure that Council is committed to the asset management practice. And the second thing is to ensure that we establish the guideline and the principle to guide us to implement an asset management program across our organization. And the third one, we need to ensure that we work in a collaborative approach to ensure that our asset management program is integrated into our organization and to ensure aligned with the Council priority as well with all our strategic plan. So this is the main objective for the asset management policy. It's a high-level document. The detail will come after. And why we want to do it? The mission for our asset management program is very simple for me. I always like it, is we want to provide the optimal level at the lowest life cycle cost. And how we're going to do this? We're going to do it through the management of our existing or any new infrastructure, but to manage to ensure that everything we do is done in socially, environmentally, and cost-effective, sustainable manner. So this is the overall of our asset management program. In front of you, the purpose we are doing updating our asset management policy is every 3 years we need to update it to see if there's any changes. And the purpose for the changes we're making here is to accomplish two things. The first thing we need to ensure that always to continue consider climate change, whether it's on the mitigation side or adaptation side, is considered in any update, whether it's we have upgraded our infrastructure or we have a new infrastructure to make sure we have ensure we have in place any adaptation measure to adapt to climate change hazard, as well to implement mitigation measures to reduce our greenhouse gases. So this is the first one. The second one we want to make sure is we need to consider quality of life, to improve the quality of life for the public, to consider it as part of our capital investment every time we do a capital plan. So this is the two main things for the purpose of this asset management policy changes. And in the past, we were working on our asset management for the last 3 years. We put a lot of policy, strategy, educate the staff, and we are using, as Mr. McGovern indicated, every time we do our capital program or operating budget, everything, we are using risk-based analysis. Identify risk-based as well, and sometimes we use life cycle cost to identify where we need to spend and how we're going to prioritize our capital investment. The city has done a great job in the last 3 years by managing effectively our infrastructure and able to reduce our infrastructure deficit significantly. So this put us in a very good position right now to be able to move our investment into how can we improve the quality of life for the city of St. John. So this is the reason we are doing this one here. So this is now we are moving an opportunity to do this one here. And the second thing, again, as imperative is because changes has in the past couple of years, 3 years, the government, province of New Brunswick, the federal government, on all their funding application, they want to ensure the city of St. John take into consideration climate change hazard. So any condition we need to get funding is required. And this is not only good for funding, is to ensure that we are ready for our climate change, reduce greenhouse gases, and energy costs as well as operating costs. So I'm not going to go into detail here. So what we recommended for the Finance Committee here is to ensure that Finance Committee approve the policies, the following changes to the asset management policy is to make sure we combine the risk and climate change consideration as a single principle. We want to be one risk. We talk about risk. When we talk about risk, we cannot talk about the physical condition of the risk as well as the climate change impact on this asset. The second thing, we want to adjust the level of service principle to include quality of life infrastructure and make sure we align with all the strategic plan, whether it's Move SJ, Plan SJ, capital planning, or whatever it is. We want to make sure everything aligned together. And the last one is mostly it's housekeeping item is we remove Section 9 strategy. And also we further recommend that the Finance Committee recommend Council approve the update asset management policy and at the next council meeting. Thank you very much. I'm open to question. Brief.
Thank you, Mr. Yamin. Any questions from committee? None in-house? No blinking lights on the screen at... Councillor Norton, did you have a question or comment?
No, none here, Mr. Chairman. Yes, every time Samir comes, he's always bringing improvement. So once again, he never fails.
Thanks, Councillor. Yes, just no question for me, just a couple of comments. I think it's very smart of us, but it's sad that climate change is now part of our normal language when it comes to risk. I think very prudent of us to have it combined with risk in the report, but it's also a continued message to us all in the other work that we do and everybody else that how real and how important it is that we address it. And the other piece, you know, as Mr. Fudge has educated me in the last couple of weeks as we've talked about these things in the update to the asset management strategy, you know, how important it is that we include quality of life as a consideration, because we have such an infrastructure deficit that if we just measured everything against risk, we never would get an opportunity at some of those quality of life things. So the fact that we need to recognize that as part of the strategy to retain residents and to recruit more residents, that we need to consider quality of life things, I think is very important. I really appreciate that being included in the change as well. So the recommendations would be that Finance Committee endorse these changes and recommend that Council approve and update the asset management problem with the asset management policy with these changes to the next meeting of Council. Can I have a mover for that recommendation? Thanks, Councillor Radwin. Seconder? Thank you, Your Worship.
Second.
On the motion, any questions? All in favor, aye. Contrary minded?
Aye.
Carried unanimously. Thanks very much, Mr. Yamin. Just before we get to 3.8, sorry, 3.7, just want to take a moment, not so much for those in the room, but for anybody who may be listening at home. This is our first meeting of the new Finance Committee, and we've had a clean audit report through a pandemic and a cyber attack, which speaks so well to our staff and how they adapted. And that doesn't talk about the extra time they would have put in and the creativity that would have had to happen to keep going. Another financial policy to improve our ABC reporting, working on the business with our internal audit function. You know, I made a note and forgot to mention it when we were looking at, had the presentation on the consolidated financial statements, but not lost on me was we used $4.5 million of provincial money, but 9.3 million was what was allocated to us. I think the city's recognition that it's the same taxpayer and the prudence that we showed with that money, that the auditors have come through and said, yep, stamped at that we used less than half that was initially allocated to us shows that we are working to be good stewards of the taxpayer's dollar. Through to a review of our policy, because so often we have policies and we talk about we need to review them on a regular basis. Well, here is the asset management review, and we talk about modernizing it, even though it's only 3 years old, adding climate change in, making sure we're talking about quality of life, be included in the strategy. A lot of very good news, and I don't want those to get lost when we talk about the next bit of good news. So I'll pass that over to Mr. McGovern.
Thank you, Chairman Sullivan. Once again, good evening. This evening I'll provide Finance Committee with an overview on the reasons why we're recommending Revision 3 to the 2021 capital budgets program for both the General Fund and the Utility Fund. So there are 3 priority projects that have come up that require funding to be completed in a timely fashion. The Dever Road Intermodal Terminal in West St. John, also known as the Lancaster Logistics Park, utility SCADA upgrades, and the renewal of a sewer that has resulted in some sinkholes near Centennial School. So as it relates to the Dever Road Intermodal Terminal, or the Lancaster Logistics Park, as detailed in the council report on June 28th to council, there's a substantial amount of city infrastructure, corrugated steel, old pipe that is combined sewer that is at the end of the asset life and is set for renewal in approximately the next 5 years. So the infrastructure is located in the planned development site. And to fully separate that system into a separate storm and sanitary flows, we need 2 pipe systems there. So this is really a win-win-win solution as it addresses an asset that's at end of life for the city. It also separates combined sewer, and it does so at a low cost for the city while also preparing the site for redevelopment. So the city would pay the cost of just the materials associated with this, which would be the pipe and manholes, those sorts of things. And the developer, and also the cost of construction management, and the developer would absorb the cost for the installation of the new infrastructure, and that'll be part of an agreement that we'll bring back to council in the future. As it relates to our SCADA system, there are several upgrades that we can make to the communication system that will further enhance the protection of that system. And lastly, the emergency sewer replacement. St. John Water has a sewer. It's just located off Izzard Street in the Centennial School area. There are some sinkholes that developed there. We did put some fencing around it to assure public safety. But we have been proceeding with design, and we do want to get as much work done as possible, as quickly as possible, to try and get out of that area before school resumes. So that's the other main driver for being before you. As it relates to the utility, the revised 2021 capital budget is just over $12 million. Utility funding for capital budget remains unchanged at nearly $6.25 million. There is, however, a reduction in funding from others that amounts to just under $573,000, which is due to 2 things. We applied for funding to the Environmental Trust Fund in the amount of $50,000. We did not receive that. And secondly, there's about $522,000 which is related to roof replacements on St. John Water facilities. And we had intended to do that work this year, by the end of this year, because those were the initial funding requirements. However, the federal government has come out. They've extended the deadline to December 31st of 2023. And because of some, all the activity going on in the construction industry at this time, and because of pricing, we did get back on roof replacement on some of our other facilities just this spring with City Market and Fire Station. We felt it's in the best interest of the city to tender this in the winter months when it's lower construction activity, and we feel that we can get better value out of the overall project cost. So that's it with respect to the utility. Just shifting to the general fund. Overall, it remains unchanged, the general fund capital budget. However, it does mean that we would postpone the 2022 Charlotte Street reconstruction, which is just one block. And there are a few good reasons to do that. One, there's underground work that needs to be done as it relates to moving the electrical underground. So we've been working with St. John Energy on that. Additional work needs to happen to get that design completed and be ready to move the electrical underground on that block. Also, it's identified in the secondary plan, or the South Central Peninsula, as one of those streets that's a complete street. And so we do want to come back to council and working collaboratively with Commissioner Hugenholtz and his team to identify some cross sections in terms of what this street could look like, so that we bring that back to council and have council's endorsement before moving forward with this. And this entire street will be reconstructed as part of our bilateral funding over the next 5 years. So. And with that, the recommendations are here on the slide before you, and I turn it back to you, Chairman Sullivan. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. McGovern. Questions, comments from committee? Councillor Radwan.
So full transparency, I struggle with this a little bit. Because the logistics park is not yet approved, and I totally appreciate timelines and everything. I can understand. I can understand needing to get things done sooner than later if their project is going to go through. I worry about. We're supposed to remain, fair in our last judgment call at the end of third reading. I hate to have the expectation kind of sitting there like this, kind of making it feel like it's already approved. So that's kind of where my concern is. I am thinking that this is already part of budget. Commissioner Fudge, are you able to? I think that this is already part of our regular capital budget.
Thank you. To address your question, Councillor, you raise a good point, and we did note in the report in terms of, assuring that no money would be spent in this regard until it is approved by council, the project. If, for example, it was not approved, we would come back to council and look to reallocate those funds. However, since we were here for the two other projects that were key drivers, we thought it was efficient to bring the recommendation with respect to the Lancaster Logistics Park as well, understanding, like we say again in the report, that no money will be spent until there's approval.
Yeah, I guess my concern is too, of course, staff are in negotiations with the developer, so I don't want the other party to feel like this is something that's already going through, right? So, but the other two projects I see as really pertinent, absolutely, and I understand timelines. Just a question, Commissioner McGovern. What is the best practice when it usually comes to development in other cities? Are the developers normally paying for all of this sort of infrastructure change, or how does that normally work?
Yeah, that's really on a case-by-case basis. I think where you see a lot of intense development and a lot of market activity, there's more taken on by the developer. In this case, this is not something, just to clarify, that we're negotiating at this time. This is something that was done in advance of PAC approval, and so we needed to have those discussions in advance of a PAC consideration. And so we did have those initial discussions, identified that it is part of our plan to renew this infrastructure anyway within the next 5 years. And so we felt it fair that a cost-sharing arrangement with respect to materials being paid solely by the city, and the installation cost by the developer was a fair arrangement. But that's where we left it at this point, subject to, again, the approvals by council and then coming back if that does happen with an agreement.
And I appreciate that. So it's something that has to be done anyway. Just wondering, just out of curiosity, when you brought that up, and I thought that was a great point, should this actually be going even a longer length? Is there a requirement that, we're going to have to do even a bigger project in the next 5 years in that area, like extension of this?
No, this addresses all the infrastructure requirements within that development site. Which is important to get done before there'd be any development activity there, because otherwise the costs will incur for the city of St. John as it'll become much more complex.
Okay, well that seems like a bit of a win. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Your Worship, Councillor Norton, questions, comments?
All good here.
Okay, thank you. Just a follow-up for me from Councillor. So if third reading didn't go, because certainly it's still within Councillor's purview, but we pass this recommendation in advance, what would happen?
So we would not spend any money, and we would come back to council with either a new project, or it would be money that would not get spent and would be surplus funds.
Okay, Thank you. We've got a recommendation presented before us. Could I have a mover?
I'll move that recommendation.
Seconder, Councillor Radwin. On the motion, all in favor, aye.
Aye.
Contrary minded? Carried. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. McGovern. 3.8 Gas Tax Fund. Mr. Fudge.
Thank you, Chairman Sullivan. Members of the committee. I'll offer some introductory comments, and perhaps I'll actually turn it over to the city manager as well, who I'm sure wants to speak on this item. I've been waiting for 5 years for I guess a presentation like this. It's been a tough 5 years. Earlier this evening, you heard a recommendation from Mr. Yemin on the asset management policy, which teed this item up with respect to modifying criteria in the asset management policy to consider quality of life for the community. I just want to highlight with that, staff arrived at that recommendation through consultation with R.V. Anderson, ensuring that we preserve best practices in asset management, that being top of mind with respect to that change. Previously, that criteria in that asset management policy, as they mentioned, heavily weighted on risk, and it was very difficult for quality of life investments to rise to the top of the priority. Earlier this year, the federal government, as part of their stimulus program, announced that cities will receive a one-time payment in gas tax funds equivalent to the funds they've received in their 2020-2021 gas tax program. And so for St. John, what that meant was St. John would be receiving a one-time influx of approximately about $4.6 million through that announcement. With this additional one-time gas tax funding, staff's proposing approximately $6 million to be included in the upcoming draft 2022 general capital budget to be brought forward this fall, to be allocated to investments with respect to quality of life for citizens. To be clear, this evening, the Finance Committee is not being asked to approve any capital investments in this presentation, as it relates to the list and the presentation Mr. Levine from my office will shortly give, but to provide feedback to staff as to whether you endorse the evaluation criteria for which we've created and selected the projects on the list. If this committee endorses the evaluation criteria, we would also bring the proposed list of projects to Common Council as a receive and file to receive their feedback. And we will consolidate the feedback and take into consideration this feedback when drafting a recommended 2022 general capital budget, again, to be brought forward this fall. I will quickly highlight that two of the criteria in the selection process that were very important, that you'll see in the presentation, is that the projects and the investments proposed must comply with the city's suite of financial policies, as well as the investments shall be identified or must be identified in the city's various strategic financial plans that we've invested in the past. So before handing the presentation over to Mr. Levine, perhaps I'll ask the city manager to add any additional comments.
Members of the committee, just very quickly, we could quite easily come to you with a staff recommendation that says, let's take this additional $4-point-something million and put it into the traditional underground infrastructure repairs, improvement to roads, et cetera, et cetera. The reality is we have done tremendous work on addressing our infrastructure deficit. We are on the right track, and we will continue down that exact same track with the rest of our capital program. But the community has done its bit and has not received significant investment in what we are calling quality of life projects in the last few years because of the disciplined approach we took to reduce the deficit. We believe this is an opportunity. It may be the only opportunity over the next few years. We just don't know. It depends on a lot of unknowns at this point in time. But the opportunity is there, and this is a tremendous opportunity, and in our view, a very good news story should council support it, that we can do this injection into quality of life projects, such as parks improvements, active transportation, et cetera, that would make a significant difference to the city. My final point, and it's a bit of a regrettable point, you will find that $4 to $6 million, or approximately $6 million is what we're aiming for, does not go very far. And it will certainly not address the needs of the entire community. But it is certainly a step in the right direction. And based on the criteria that will be explained to you in a moment, you'll see that we are trying to make sure that the majority of our community benefits in some way from what we are recommending to council. And with that, I'll hand over to Mr. Craig Levine.
Thank you, Mr. City Manager. Good evening, members of the Finance Committee. So for the purposes of this presentation, we are defining quality of life as investments that fall within the responsibilities and authority of local government that contribute to the wellness, livability, and vibrancy of our community. Quality of life investments should seek to bring people together, build connections, and contribute to the enjoyment our residents experience through municipal assets. And this is just a quick overview of our proposed timeline for the capital budget. I won't go through each dates in detail. So as CEO Fudge mentioned, the federal government announced a one-time injection. These funds would flow directly through the municipalities through the federal gas tax fund. And as Mr. Fudge alluded to, we are anticipating a little over $4.6 million. And these are the eligibility criteria for each for the gas tax funding. And again, I won't go through each of these in detail. So just a little bit of background on our capital investments. So our capital investments are guided by several policies that align with various plans, such as the asset management policy, capital budget policy, debt management policy, various plans such as Plan SJ, Play SJ, Move SJ, and the Central Peninsula Neighborhood Plan. And again, we've continued to focus on investments, on renewal of assets due to our infrastructure deficit. Capital program is now 85% renewal and 15% new capital. Our capital budget policy sets out the prioritization of our capital renewal based on asset management data, as well as mandatory. Do we have a contractual agreement to replace this asset? Risk of failure. What is the likelihood of failure and what's the impact? Obviously, a water main failure in the uptown core versus a less populated area would have a bigger impact. Is the investment a priority of council? Does the investment have a positive financial impact? And I guess Fundy Key would be a great example of that. And is the investment discretionary? And as we mentioned earlier, under the existing policies, quality of life assets such as recreation, parks, active transportation often ranks lower due to the risk of failure and the consequence of failure. As Mr. Yamin presented earlier tonight, with the revised asset management policy, we're addressing this by considering quality of life. With all that being said, it is being recommended that the one-time gas tax funding, along with city share, for a total of $6 million be invested in quality of life assets. Proposed investments were chosen based on criteria that considers all our financial policies, our asset management data, various approved city plans, and priorities. And here's our quality of life criteria. So first and foremost, as CEO Fudge mentioned, it must comply with our approved financial policies. The investments must be subject to council approval in the operating budget. And this is important because some of these investments that we're proposing tonight will have no or minimal impact on our annual operating costs, while other investments may increase our annual operating costs. And these additional costs will need to be approved as part of the annual operating budget. Investments must be made through the entire city. We cannot just focus on one or two areas of the city. Another key criteria is the project needs to be identified within an existing plan, as mentioned earlier. And we must continue to action our plans. Much effort, stakeholder engagement, and resources went into our various plans. The plans lay out where and what the investments need to be. We must continue to follow our asset management data and criteria of 85% renewal and 50% new. We need to consider what projects offer the greatest use for the most people, what investment ensures the most access for the most people and offers the greatest engagement. Consideration given to projects that provide the greatest growth return potential for the city. Projects are to be completed or well underway by the end of 2022, and this is to ensure that there's an immediate impact on the community for these investments. Lastly, we want to ensure that these projects align with our population and growth strategy. We want to be a welcoming community, ensure citizens have a sense of belonging.
Mr. Levine, can we pause there for a second?
Sure.
And really, for committee, for me, this is a very key point to pause, because before we get to what the recommendations are, we need to feel comfortable with the framework and the criteria. So just want to check in with the committee and actually, before we even continue on, once we're okay with them, ask for a motion to endorse them before we talk about the rest of things. But any questions, comments from committee members with regards to the criteria that was used? So hearing none, just to formalize it, could I ask for a motion that just says that the Finance Committee endorses this criteria?
I can move that.
Thank you, Your Worship. Seconder, Councillor Radwin, on that motion, all in favor, aye?
Aye.
Contrary minded? Okay, unanimous endorsement from the Finance Committee. Thanks very much. Real important that we continue to follow our policies and that we do things within a structure. Thanks very much. Please continue, Mr. Levine.
And supporting the city's growth agenda. So here is our list of proposed investments. So Rockwood Park is a regional park and designated as one in Play SJ. As part of its approved master park plan, it is recommended that Phase 3 move forward with funding of $1.8 million. This will see investments into Lake Drive Bridge and ponds, the Interpretation Center, some road work and trail work. Next, Dominion Park is also designated as a district park in Play SJ, and we'll see an additional $600,000 added to the $285 that is already earmarked for a total of $885 investment to support the rehabilitation of the park, along with supporting the community's recently developed master plan. Marketplace West, another district park, will see $400,000 invested to rehabilitate the existing assets. Staff are also recommending going to seek potential external funding partners to try and increase this capital investment. This investment is part of the most current master park plan and aligns with Play SJ. Forest Hills, another district playground within Play SJ, will see upgrades and replace much of the current playground with a proposed investment of $400,000. Harbor Passage, the $700,000 budget proposes an extension of Harbor Passage to Tin Can Beach. This investment will also align with Play SJ, Move SJ, and the Central Peninsula Neighborhood Plan. This active transportation investment also aligns with current and future development opportunities. As part of the city's effort To create more active transportation options and align with Move SJ, it is being recommended that $400,000 be invested in Main Street North to create a protected bike lane. This investment would also help alleviate some of the cycling demand on Harbor Passage today. It is being recommended that $100,000 be included for arts and culture. It's important to recognize the city's diversity and continued efforts to become the most welcoming community in Atlantic Canada. Details of investments after the proper engagements and due diligence will be brought forward for consideration at a later date. Also, as the city continues to grow its diverse population, there is a need to look at existing assets like fields and ball fields in need of rehabilitation to see if these assets can be enhanced, supported, or adjusted to support more recreational offerings. The proposed $200,000 investment needs to support other sporting opportunities such as cricket, disc golf, as an example, for all members of our community. There is a need throughout the entire city to undertake more beautification and greening efforts. This $350,000 investment could involve greening more medians, planting more trees, creating more pedestrian bump outs, and more city branding. And again, details of the recommended investments will be brought forward at a later date. The budget also includes $500,000 to be invested in Loyalist Plaza that will undergo a complete rehabilitation as part of the Fundy Key redevelopment. Public consultation has been undertaken for this portion of the project, and several ideas have been put forward, such as an ice pad as an example. Again, final plans and recommendations for the space will be brought forward at a future date. Little River Reservoir, or as the Res, as most people call it, has seen significant investments over the years. It is being recommended as part of the Master Park Plan and Play SJ that an additional $50,000 be earmarked to continue with the ongoing investments. South Market Street, $250,000 is being proposed to convert the street into a priority pedestrian street in coordination with the development plans in that area. And then the overall capital investment plan, which is above and beyond our normal, would require an additional $250,000 for design and engineering. So in conclusion, these investments align with current policies and plans. The projects align with criteria established. Projects fit within the gas tax funding, and it also addresses our infrastructure deficit. So I'll just say it again, but staff recommend that the Finance Committee endorse the quality of life criteria established for the proposed investments and to receive and file this report as presented and forward a copy of the report and presentation to the next meeting of Common Council as a receive and file. And with that, we would like to take any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Levine.
Can I,
Your Worship?
I was going to say, can I move that recommendation and say Yahoo as well?
You can certainly move it and say Yahoo. Would anybody like to second?
Second that, Mr. Chairman, enthusiastically.
Thanks, Councillor Norton. Questions or comments? Councillor Radwan.
Yeah, just a couple of quick comments. I mean, of course, this is great news. We're all feeling the Yahoo for sure. With looking at the criteria where these funds could be used, I do want to make a point that I'm hoping that there's going to be some transit money coming from federal dollars. But if that, for some reason, was not the case, then it may be a good idea to look at utilizing these funds there, as I know that's much needed. Another piece that this could have went into is disaster mitigation, and I have to mention that because of we've all experienced last week. Commissioner McGovern can totally feel the pain of what happened when we had so much rain on the east side, and a lot of staff. So I know that you probably would require a lot more funding than what could go out there, but I'm just thinking that might be something for consideration too. But this is all great news, and this is a receive and file, so it's not a decision that we're actually making before our council priorities are done. So I mean, I'm totally on board. It's great, wonderful.
Mr. Mr. Chairman, if I can add a couple comments to Councillor Radwan's questions. First of all, I just want to make clear that this is a snippet of the overall 2022 proposed capital investment list. There's a greater capital budget that will be coming before you with respect to proposed 2022 capital budget. There are other plans, there are other strategies. For instance, you mentioned St. John Transit. Well, we invested heavily in a Stantec report that made various recommendations with respect to what we should be putting investments with respect to transit. We'll be evaluating that, and those are considerations that we will be looking at when we bring the entire list to you for consideration for the 2022. So I just want to make clear. And the other point is, again, we are continuing, although quality of life criteria is now a consideration, we understand there's certainly risk, asset deterioration, asset renewal. All those priorities need to be considered, reviewed, understood, and analyzed before bringing a final recommendation to Common Council.
And, Councillor Redwin, you actually you made an important point that we're at receive and file stage right now. Several of the policies that these have to fall under, we approved or recommended a change, an important change one earlier. Any assets that are built under this funding might not be mitigation, but have to take risk in mind when they are developed and built. So climate change would be part of the design and thoughts going forward. Yeah, this is the start of the conversation. Your Worship or Councillor Norton, any other comments or questions?
Not for me. Thank you, though.
City Manager.
No, I'm here.
Members of committee, if I may, just one other additional point that wasn't specifically mentioned in the briefing, but as part of our policies. This is one-time money. It's not recurring money. And therefore, this money must be by design based on capital, not operating costs. I've already had suggestions, for example, back to transit. There are certainly things we can do in terms of capital improvements, but we could not use this to temporarily subsidize transit operations within the city of St. John. That would be contrary to policy, and quite frankly, just kicks a very difficult situation down the road that would need to be addressed. So again, our focus is squarely on capital with this money because it is singular, one-time, non-recurring funding to the city. Thank you.
And just some comments from me. We quickly went through the criteria, but we paused because that's important. As the city manager said, not only is it one-time money, but important that ideas that come out of this are subject to our operational budget. This is year 10 for me on council, and this is the first time I've ever seen something like this in front of me. But I'm also very cognizant of spending this money that costs us money every year and puts pressure, and then we're in the operating budget saying, oh gosh, we built a whatever. What are we going to lose in our operational budget in order to fund that? So that's an important piece. That's within the criteria going forward. And the other piece I really like about all of this that was in the criteria that was recommended to us, these are all either part of existing plans or plans that are in development, i.e. Loyalist Plaza is going under a huge development right now as part of Fundy Key, but we're putting money to operationalize plans that we have, that experts have seen, engineers have worked with, the public has had input on, and so looking forward. And I know these parks and I was here a long time ago when we put 3 phases of a Rockwood Park design together, got a couple done, and then the city's financial position changed. So it's really nice that we can go back to these plans that we invested money and time in and put some money behind them. It is going to be an exciting next 14 months in the city of St. John. So with that, I'm looking for a motion to receive and file and to send to Common Council with a recommendation to receive and file. Thank you, Councillor Radwin. Seconder. Thank you, Your Worship. On the motion, all in favor, aye.
Aye.
Contrary minded? Carried with a Yahoo. Oh, I'm sorry, Your Worship, you moved that before.
I did. It's fine. I'm happy to do it twice. It's so fantastic.
It deserves 2 yahoos. I agree.
It does.
And with
I'm
that,
going to
just-
sign off if you don't mind.
No,
Is that
thanks
all right?
very much for taking
Thank
part of
you.
your vacation to join us.
All right.
Just wrapping up. Thank you, Your Worship. Councillor Norton, if
Thank
you can
you.
stick around for another 60 seconds, just keep our quorum. Just some quick thank yous from the chair. First of all, to the councillors and the committee for joining, because it is high summertime, and this was a heavy agenda with a lot of work to be done. So thank you for joining us. City staff on and off of vacations, taking time to get the kit ready, bring a new chairman up to speed, take your time tonight, and really to continue to demonstrate to the public that we aren't silos in the city of St. John. Heavy lifting done by the Finance Committee, but we've got support from Strategic Services here, and certainly a whole lot of support from the Common Clerk's Department. So thanks to the entire team. And with that, I will, if there are no further comments. We have one more item.
Oh, we have to table it.
You're in forecast. Oh, I was all excited. Oh, we still got quorum. 3.9. 3.9. You're in forecast. Mr. Fudge, you can introduce. I'll have to wind myself up again.
My apologies, Mr. Chairman. We'll try to be brief. This is the year-end forecast for the results for 2021. You'll be seeing this regularly at the Finance Committee. We have senior staff in attendance. Mr. Levine will walk us through the presentation. What you're going to see is each service area presented in 2 fashions. One, the year-to-date results, and then what their forecasts are expected to be for the remainder of the year. I will highlight that this is the first the first review that we're doing under the new budget monitoring policies for such that wages and benefits must be separately analyzed from goods and services, and there cannot be subsidization between those 2 expenditures. So with that, in the interest of time, I'll turn it over to Mr. Levine to go through this presentation very expeditiously.
Oh, thank you, CEO Fudge. Again, the purpose of the presentation is to give the Finance Committee a year-to-date financial results and year-end projections. Again, the cyber attack did have an impact on matching budgets with anticipated expenditures and revenue. So typically, budgets are entered in a fiscal year that will best match the timing of our expenses and revenues, the timing. So I apologize, it says 2022 because I am working on the 2022 budget, but this is 2021 budgets had to be entered by finance due to limited resources and timing. Many of the budget line items were entered and spread equally over 12 months, and this will create a lot of timing issues as staff present May budget results. Examples, snow removal budget would have been entered equally over 12 months versus typically budgeted between January to April and then again October, December. Liability insurance, typically budgeted in 1 month, but it's over 12. So again, there's going to be some timing issues and everybody will speak to that. General revenues. As of May 2021, we are sitting at a surplus of $2.814 million. So growth in community services, the majority of the variance relates to timing related to revenue recovery of programs. Revenues for dangerous buildings program, funding for Succeed and Stay, and local immigration will all be recognized at the end of the year. Transportation and environmental services, variance is a combination of parking revenue and fines that are still being impacted by COVID-19, as well as the cyber attack. Strategic service, as many of you might remember, the city received a little over $3.6 million from the federal government for COVID Safe Restart funding. These funds were unbudgeted. However, the recommendation from council was to transfer these funds into an operating reserve. Year-end forecasts. We are anticipating a surplus of $6.4 million for total revenues. Property taxes. Property tax receiving a favorable variance of 1.082 in additional taxes from the elimination of the tax assessment gap program in early 2021, as well as additional property taxes received from LNG of 2.12. And I'll just quickly touch base on the P-gap assessment. The property assessment gap, or P-gap, was established in 2013, for which a little over 100,000 homeowners were not paying property taxes on true market value of their properties. These exemptions were introduced for the 2013 taxation year as a way to gradually return property values to market value-based system after a 3% cap was put on owner-occupied residential properties due to increasing values for the 2011 and 2012 taxation years. The tax-based adjustment from this cancel program allowed the city to receive this revenue, and with this permanent adjustment to our tax base, these funds are considered recurring. Council approved that these recurring revenues be used in the 2022 budget for a tax rate reduction. LNG revenue, LNG revenue was confirmed once the deadline for tax appeal passed. Under current legislation, property tax assessment for LNG is fixed at $18 million a year until the province notifies the city in May that the LNG assessment of $98 million has not been appealed. Once that happens, this additional revenues flow through to the city. On the other side of the coin, the unconditional grant is reduced because of this additional LNG revenue by about $800,000. And with that, I will turn it over Growth and Community Services to Ms. Hamilton.
Yes, good evening, members of Finance Committee. So just as a bit of context for the Growth and Community Services budget, it would be a total of $15.5 million, about 10% of the city's budget, and includes both the core Growth and Community Services, internal city services, as well as the contributions to the external ABCs and grants. And about 25% of the budget would be recovered through revenues. So this slide shows both the year-to-date results as well as our projections for year-end. And yes, looking at the year-to-date results, the reasons for the variances are primarily due to timing issues. And it's to do with the timing of external grants versus our assumptions with respect to the budgeting. And looking at the year-end projections, we're projecting to be over budget by about $277,000 due to two main reasons, which is higher program costs related to the Dangerous Buildings Program. And this is primarily due to complexity and timing of demolitions. And I would note that these are fully recovered through revenues from the province, so offset in the revenues. And the other reason is related to additional funding to support our population growth partnerships. So through the Local Immigration Partnership and Succeed and Stay, we are leveraging additional contributions and new programs through funding from the federal government. So overall, a good news story with the variance being offset by revenue, and we are projecting a positive variance of just under $400,000 by year end. Thank you.
And over to you, Mr. Hugenholtz.
Thank you, Mr. Levine. Just briefly, the year-to-date, it's not as meaningful in our area as the year-end projections, but I will note that particularly this year with the challenges around the cyber attack, we were late and delayed in a lot of invoice processing, so that's changed some of our numbers so far. And in terms of year-end, we are looking at a surplus position right now, predominantly due to the light winter that we did have. That's impacted both our overtime costs, equipment rental costs, as well as our salt consumption so far. So that's where we are.
Thank you. Over to you, Chief Clifford. I just want to highlight quickly that this slide includes both the Police Commission as well as Fire and Safety.
Yeah. Good evening, Mr. Chairman and members of the Commission, not the Commission, the Finance Committee. I've lost my screen, so I've got to look up and at the screen here. Our year-to-date projection is around $500,000, and basically a lot of that has to do with timing. We had two people that were on workers' comp, now one, and two people on LTD, and we save a fair amount of money when those employees' salaries are covered by other programs. So our year-to-date is 500. When we do our projections, we actually project as if those to the end of the year, we actually project as if those people come back to work tomorrow. What we don't want to do is have an inflated projection. So our projection based on that practice is that we'll be somewhere in the vicinity, and I'm going from top of mind here, somewhere in the vicinity of $200,000 to the good. Our goods and services, fairly well balanced. Year to date, the challenges, we've had a couple expenditures, and I think all departments have, with respect to Microsoft licenses being far greater than what we anticipated as an organization. And also the insurance cost of our properties were far greater too. So our goods and services right now are at a deficit, a small deficit, but overall our organization, the fire and EMO are somewhere in the vicinity of $200,000 from the end of the year.
And I also wanted to note that for some members, street lighting is also included in public safety, and it is anticipated to be over about $40,000. And we're doing a lot of refurbishment of lighting poles. And I'll quickly touch base on St. John Police and PSEC. So wages and benefit year to date are in a positive trend, about $380,000. Variance is due to vacancies, additional staff hired later in the year, less overtime budget, and that's only on the police side, because I'm sure folks have heard on PSAC quite a bit of late. Goods and services, again, large portion related to vehicles, budgeting timing. You know, the expenditure has seen nothing with a budget of $177,000 with no expenditures. Overall, year to date, we're looking at about $228,000 surplus. Wages and benefits, again, we are anticipating to be in over about $337,000, again, due to vacancies, additional staff hired later in the year, and retirements. And goods and services being over budget about $100,000. Again, as Chief Clifford alluded to, police are under the same with additional IT charges and support for 2021. And I'll turn this one over to Mr. McGovern for utilities and infrastructure.
Thank you, Craig. Focusing first on the top of your screen here, the year-to-date variance for utilities and infrastructure. As you can see, our year-to-date wages are essentially right on budget. However, goods and services are showing a variance. Specifically, facility management is the largest driver of the variance, showing a variance of approximately $71,000. The variance relates to timing issue around billing other departments for work performed by our facilities team. So we incur the expense, but it takes time for us to realize the revenue associated with that expense. And then if you can just go to the prior screen there, Craig. Yeah. Shifting now to the year-end variance, wages and benefits. As you can see, we're forecasting $9,000 exceedance due to staffing changes as part of reorganization. For goods and services, we're forecasting 6% exceedance, with the drivers of those costs being associated with the City Hall move and the cost of building maintenance as it relates to COVID-19 items. And the third driver is internal charges that relate to fleet services, fleet fuel, and computer charges that were not budgeted due to splitting up stormwater into rural and urban as part of the organizational realignment. And that's something that will be addressed in 2022. That's everything. Thanks.
Thank you. Mr. Fudge.
Before I jump into strategic services, I think if I could refer you to page 270 of your kit, because I think it's important to see the big picture here. We're throwing a lot of numbers around. But with respect to the year-end forecast, page 270 of your kit shows every service area, what the year-to-date variance is, and what the year-to-date or what the year-end forecast is. And what we're forecasting overall for this city as of now is about 1.2 million in surplus forecasted for 2021. To put that into perspective, that is a little more than 2/3 of 1% variance for the year. So it's quite, we have close to $160 million budget. So for all intents and purposes, that's pretty close to being on budget. I know we're showing on these slides revenue separately from expenses, and there's numbers everywhere, but it's really important for everyone to be clear that we're forecasting pretty much close to being on budget for 2021 as of the end of May. I'll jump into strategic services. I think Mr. Levine provided a pretty good synopsis of what's going on with this budget. So first of all, with respect to wages and benefits, really it's a positive variance. It's primarily due with some vacancies that we've seen in finance and in our supply chain management services. That's natural vacancies you see any time of the year. Those always create some surpluses. Keep our eye on that to make sure that they're not permanent adjustments that we need to make moving forward. With respect to goods and services, you'll see a sizable deficit there. That's really the investment. You're going to see an offset up in the revenue for the majority of that cost. This is really the investment in the cyber investments that we need in order to restore city services. And we're expecting the majority of those costs to be covered by insurance. So you'll see in the revenues, insurance proceeds that pretty much cover the majority of these costs. You're only seeing $1 million here because some of those costs were also borne in 2020, and there's still costs to come. So with respect to the overall strategic services budget, that pretty much summarizes the majority of the variances. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Fudge. Corporate services. So year-to-date variance, we're showing about a $58,000 in wages and benefits, and goods and service about $153,000 surplus. Wages and benefits, again, there's a management vacancy in HR. We also have an HR administrator on a temporary assignment within the police commission. And again, there was a temporary vacancy on council. Goods and services, again, majority relates to the timing issues and the budget input. Like conferences and travel is obviously way down due to, since the beginning of COVID. These costs may start to increase towards the end of the year. Consultant fees, management job evaluation, and other possible arbitration costs may come later in the year. Disability management costs have decreased since the beginning of COVID-19. Overall, year-end variance is about $55,000 positive variance with very little variance in wages and benefits. And goods and services, we anticipate the majority of that to come from our disability management costs. Other charges. So year to date, we are over budget by $3.6 million. Again, that is the transfer to reserves from the COVID Safe Restart funding. The revenue comes in, we book the offsetting expense to go to a reserve. And then for the year end, we're predicting the 4.7, and as Mr. Fudge alluded to, the majority of that is not only the COVID Safe Restart, but about $1 million in insurance recovery. Or PGAP adjustment, sorry, PGAP adjustment for the reserves. St. John Water, Mr. McGovern.
Thank you. With respect to St. John Water, looking at year-to-date for the revenue analysis, the variance is a combination of billing delays around metered accounts as a result of the cyber attack. And so those are getting back on track, and which will result, we're showing in a year-end estimated forecast of about $66,000 to the good on the revenue side. However, our flat rate billings are down less due to less customers on flat rate than budgeted. But other revenue is trending up as a result of more interest charges and home sales that are occurring in the city. With that being up, it's also resulting in positive revenue for the utility. And there's some other revenue coming in from our reserves for capital projects being done. And looking at our expenses year-to-date, wages and year-to-date were approximately $3.6 million to the good. Wages and benefits is under significantly due to various staffing vacancies and timing of how casual staff were budgeted. Goods and services year-to-date has a significant positive variance that can be attributed to timing issues around expenditures. This budget went in as evenly apportioned over 12 months, whereas typically we budget it to reflect our actual anticipated costs, and that will be done next year for our budget, and was not done this year due to the cyber attack. So many of these budgeted items will be expended over the next several months, and will be much closer to a year-end balanced budget. And so looking ahead to year-end estimates, wages and benefits is under budget for year end due to ongoing staffing vacancies. And there's also early year end projections that show the utility under budget on our potable goods and services. Staff continue to mitigate unbudgeted items related to ongoing legal issues and some new software required as a result of our cyber event. And with that, our industrial service is anticipated to be slightly over budget at about $162,000 for additional dam work we're doing and the replacement of a large meter for one of our industrial customers. But because of the way our rate setting is structured, those overages will be charged back to the industrial customer, and there's no charges of that nature that go to our potable water customers. So projections are preliminary, but many changes will occur over the coming months, but we are showing year-end positive overall when you consider the revenue and expenditures of approximately $225,000. Thanks.
Thank you. And with that, we would recommend just a receive and file on this, and certainly any questions for staff.
First, thank you to all the commissioners for reporting in on their departments. Questions, Councillor Norton or Councillor Radwin? Councillor Radwin, go ahead.
I just had a couple of small questions, actually. So the budgeted amount and the year-to-date actuals for Carleton Community Center and YMCA, just wondering what that was, why the variance there?
So again, that's a timing issue. So we would have paid out the entire amount, and we budgeted 112. So it'll catch up by the end of the year, and they will be on budget. But that's just that's a good example of what the timing issues that we're running into.
And I was thinking that it might be a timing issue as well with the variance for the special pension contribution.
Yeah.
Okay, that's what I was wondering. Just a quick comment too. So, and for the purpose of the public, staff have had to, go through the challenges of dealing with COVID-19. Unfortunately, it was disappointing to see people going to the podium and talking about having to cut some things and not be able to spend a little bit here and there. But the end result is fiscal responsibility. So, that's the good news story here today. Everything looks quite good. And then on top of that, you get a cyber attack. So we've had, unfortunately, some necessary money that we've had to spend out to protect the systems that are in place. And I have a lot of respect for all of the hard work that staff has done. Just owning a small business, these sort of things can be very hard to quickly adjust to in a small business. So imagine in an organization this size. So I really appreciate all the hard work, and everything looks really good.
Thank you, Councillor Redwin. Councillor Norton, any questions or comments?
No, Mr. Chairman, nothing here. Thanks for the report.
Thanks, Councillor Norton. I guess just kind of an overall comment again for folks who are listening at home, and perhaps for Councillor Radwin, who is new. Earlier, we had consolidated our statements from our audited statements from 2020 showing approximately a $1 million loss. So what happens to that $1 million, because we're required to have a balanced set of books, is that's the first charge against 2022 on the 2022 budget. But part of our suite of things that the Finance Committee has done in the past, and one of the things we're doing with the Safe Start funding, is a lot of that's pandemic money. Because that money's in a reserve in 2022, the City of St. John won't start behind the 8 ball. That's where we draw on the reserve to cover that, because we save for that rainy day and we get to start even. So just an example, and really all of these things are examples of policies working, so that we had $1 million loss. We're projecting about $1 million surplus currently, knock on wood for no snow. But really in a $157 million budget, $200 million-ish once you bring in St. John Water, that's basically as close to even as you're going to get. So thank you to the staff for continuing to keep our boat even and sailing straight. And so we just need a motion to receive and file. Councillor Radwin, do I have a seconder? Councillor Norton? Yes, thank you, Councillor Norton. All in favor, aye? Contrary minded?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm in a significant delay here, so.
Yeah, no worries. We got you, Councillor Norton. The Common Clerk's Department will edit all my thank yous to the end of the presentation. Again, thanks very much for all your time. I just need a motion to adjourn. Thank you. Moved by Councillor Radwin, seconded by Councillor Norton. All in favor, aye.